Hello, from the underground, from where we look to the worlds of science fiction to help us make sense of the world around it as we see it. I believe it can serve that purpose. For our aims, we're looking at Isaac Asimov. Isaac Asimov with his The Naked Sun. We left off at the end of chapter 3, so let us start with chapter the 4th. A woman is viewed. He slept at last. He did not remember when he actually made the transition to sleep. There was just a period when his thoughts grew more erratic, and then the headboard of his bed was shining and the ceiling was alight with a cool daytime glow. He looked at his watch. Hours had passed. The robots who ran the house had decided it was time for him to wake up, and he had acted accordingly. He wondered if Daniil were awake, and at once realized the illogic of the thought. Daniil could not sleep. Bailey wondered if he had counterfeited sleep as part of the role he was playing. Had he undressed and put on night clothes? As though on cue, Daniil entered. "Good morning, partner Elijah." The robot was completely dressed and his face was in perfect repose. He said, "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," said Bailey dryly. "Did you?" He got out of bed and tramped into the bathroom for a shave and for the remainder of the morning ritual. He shouted, "If a robot comes in to see me, send him out again. They get on my nerves. Even if I don't see them, they get on my nerves." He stared at his own face as he shaved, marveling a bit that it looked so like the mirrored face he saw on Earth. If only the image were another Earthman with whom he could consult, instead of only the light mimicry of himself. If he could go over what he had already learned, small as it was. Too small. Get more. He muttered to the mirror. He came out, mopping his face and pulling trousers over fresh shorts. Robots supplied everything. Damn them. He said, "Would you answer a few questions, Daniil?" "As you know, partner Elijah, I answer all questions to the best of my knowledge." "Or to the letter of your instructions," thought Bailey. He said, "Why are there only 20,000 people on Solaria?" "That is a mere fact," said Daniil. "A datum, a figure that is the result of a counting process." "Yes, but you are evading the matter. The planet can support millions. Why, then, only 20,000? You said the Solarians consider 20,000 optimum. Why?" "It is their way of life." "You mean they practice birth control?" "Yes." "And leave the planet empty?" Bailey wasn't sure why he was pounding away at this one point, but the planet's population was one of the few hard facts he had learned about it, and there was little else he could ask about. Daniil said, "The planet is not empty. It is parceled out into estates, each of which is supervised by a Solarian." "You mean each lives on his own estate, 20,000 estates, each with a Solarian?" "Fewer estates than those, partner Elijah. Wives share the estate." "No cities." Bailey felt cold. "None at all, partner Elijah. They live completely apart and never see one another except under the most extraordinary circumstances." "Hermits." "In a way, yes. In a way, no." "What does that mean?" "Agent Brewer visited you yesterday by trimensional image. Solarians visit one another freely that way, and in no other way." Bailey stared at Daniil. He said, "Does that include us? Are we expected to live that way?" "It is the custom of the world." "Then how do I investigate this case if I want to see someone?" "From this house, partner Elijah, you can obtain a trimensional view of anyone on the planet. There will be no problem." In fact, it will save you the annoyance of leaving this house. It is why I said when we arrived that there would be no occasion for you to feel it necessary to grow accustomed to facing the outdoors. And that is well. Any other arrangements would be most distasteful to you." "I'll judge what's distasteful to me," said Bailey. "First thing today, Daniel, I get in touch with the 𝗧𝗲𝗲 woman, the wife of the murdered man. If the tridimensional business is unsatisfactory, I will go to her place personally. It is a matter for my decision." "We shall see what is best and most feasible, partner Elijah," said Daniel non-committally. "I shall arrange for breakfast." He turned to leave. Bailey stared at the broad robotic back and was almost amused. Daniel 𝗧𝗲𝗏 acted the master. If his instructions had been to keep Bailey from learning any more than was absolutely necessary, a trump card had been left in Bailey's hands. The other was only our Daniel 𝗧𝗏𝗏. After all that was necessary was to tell Gruer, or any Solarian, that Daniel was a robot and not a man, and yet, on the other hand, Daniel's pseudo-humanity could be of great use too. A trump card need not be played at once. Sometimes it was more useful in the hand. Wait and see, he thought, and followed Daniel out to breakfast. Bailey said, "Now, how does one go about establishing tridimensional contact?" "It is done for us, partner Elijah," said Daniel, and his finger sought out one of the contact patches that summoned robots. A robot entered at once. Where did they come from? Bailey wondered, as one wandered aimlessly about the uninhabited maze that constituted the mansion. Not only were robots never visible, did they scramble out of the way as humans approached? Did they send messages to one another and clear the path? Yet, whenever a call went out, one appeared without delay. Bailey stared at the robotic newcomer. It was sleek, but not glossy. Its surface had a muted, grayish finish, with a checkerboard pattern on the right shoulder as the only bit of color. Squares in white and yellow, silver and gold, really, from the metallic luster, were placed in what seemed an aimless pattern. Daniel said, "Take us to the conversation room." The robot bowed and turned, but said nothing. Bailey said, "Wait, boy, what's your name?" The robot faced Bailey. It spoke in clear tones and without hesitation. "I have no name, master. My serial number," and with a metal finger lifted and rested on the shoulder patch, "is ACX 2745. Daniel and Bailey followed into a large room, which Bailey recognized as having held Gruer and his chair the day before. Another robot was waiting for them, with the eternal, patient non-boredom of the machine. The first bowed and left. Bailey compared shoulder patches of the two. As the first bowed and started out, the pattern of silver and gold was different. The checkerboard was made up of 6 by 6 squares. The number of possible arrangements would be 2 to the 36th power, then, or 70 billion. More than enough. Bailey said, "Apparently there is one robot for everything. One to show us here, one to run the viewer." Daniel said, "There is much robotic specialization in Solaria, partner Elijah. With so many of them, I can understand why." Bailey looked at the second robot. Except for the shoulder patch, and presumably for the invisible positronic patterns within its spongy platinum iridian brain, it was the duplicate of the first. He said, "And your serial number?" "ACC 1129, master." "I'll just call you boy." "Now, I want to speak with a Mrs. Gladia Delmar, wife of the late Ricane Delmar. Daniel, is there an address, some way of pinpointing her location?" Daniel said gently, "I do not believe any further information is necessary. If I may question the robot." "Let me do that," Bailey said. "All right, boy. Do you know the lady that is to be reached?" "Yes, master. I have knowledge of the connection patterns of all masters." This was said without pride. It was a mere fact, as though it were saying, "I am made of metal, matter." Daniil interposed. That is not surprising, partner Elijah. There are less than 10,000 connections that need be fed into the memory circuits, and that is a small number. Is there more than one 𝗧𝗲𝗲 𝗧𝗵𝗲 by chance? There might be the chance of confusion. Master? After the question, the robot remained blankly silent. I believe, said Daniil, that this robot does not understand your question. It is my belief that duplicate names do not occur on Solaria. Names are registered at birth, and no name may be adopted unless it is unoccupied at the time. All right, said Bailey. We learn something every minute. Now, see here, boy. You tell me how to work whatever it is I am supposed to work. Give me the connection pattern, or whatever you call it, and then step out. There was a perceptible pause before the robot answered. It said, Do you wish to make contact yourself, sir? That's right. Daniil touched Bailey's sleeve gently. One moment, partner Elijah. Now, what is it? It is my belief that the robot could make the necessary contact with greater ease. It is his specialization. Bailey said grimly, I'm sure he can do it better than I can. Doing it myself, I may make a mess of it. He stared levelly at the impassive Daniil. Just the same, I prefer to make contact myself. Do I give the orders or don't I? Daniil said, You give the orders, partner Elijah, and your orders, where first law permits, will be obeyed. However, with your permission, I would like to give you what pertinent information I have concerning the Solarian robots. Far more than any other world, the robots on Solaria are specialized. Although Solarian robots are physically capable of many things, they are heavily equipped mentally for one particular type of job. To perform functions outside their speciality requires the high potentials produced by direct application of one of the three laws. Again, for them not to perform the duty for which they are equipped also requires the direct application of the three laws. Well, then a direct order from me brings the second law into play, doesn't it? True, yet the potential set up by it is unpleasant to the robot. Ordinarily, the matter would not come up, since almost never does a Solarian interfere with the day-to-day workings of a robot. For one thing, he would not care to do a robot's work. For another, he would feel no need to. Are you trying to tell me, Daniil, that it hurts the robot to have me do its work? As you know, partner Elijah, pain in the human sense is not applicable to robotic reactions. Bailey shrugged. Then? Nevertheless, went on Daniil, the experience which the robot undergoes is as upsetting to it as pain is to the human, as nearly as I can judge. And yet, said Bailey, I'm not a Solarian, I'm an Earthman. I don't like robots doing what I can do. Consider, too, said Daniil, that to cause distress to a robot might be considered on the part of our hosts to be an act of impoliteness, since in a society such as this there must be a number of more or less rigid beliefs concerning how it is proper to treat a robot and how it is not. To offend our host would scarcely make our task easier. All right, said Bailey. Let the robot do its job. He settled back. The incident had not been without its uses. It was an educational example of how remorseless a robotic society could be. Once brought into existence, robots were not so easily removed, and a human who wished to dispense with them, even temporarily, found he could not. His eyes half closed, he watched the robot approaching the wall. Let the sociologists on Earth consider what had just occurred and draw their conclusions. He was beginning to have certain notions of his own. Half a wall slid aside, and the control panel that was revealed would have done justice to a city section power station. Bailey longed for his pipe. He had been briefed that smoking on non-smoking Solaria would be a terrible breach of decorum. Since he was not even allowed to take his fixings, he sighed. There were moments when to feel the pipe stem between his teeth and a warm bowl in his hand would have been infinitely comforting. The robot was working quickly, adjusting variable resistances a trifle here and there and intensifying field forces in proper pattern by quick finger pressures. Daniil said, "It is necessary first to signal the individual one desires to view. A robot will, of course, receive the message. If the individual being signaled is available and wishes to receive the view, full contact is established." "Are all those controls necessary?" asked Bailey. "The robot's hardly touching most of the panel." "My information on the matter is not complete, partner Elijah. There is, however, the necessity of arranging, upon occasion, for multiple viewings and for mobile viewings. The latter, particularly, calls for complicated and continuing adjustments." The robot said, "Master, contact is made and approved. When you are ready, it will be completed." "Ready," growled Bailey, and as though the word were a signal, the far half of the room was alive with light. Daniil said at once, "I neglected to have the robot specify that all visible openings on the outside be draped. I regret that, and we must arrange—" "Never mind," said Bailey, wincing. "I'll manage. Don't interfere." It was a bathroom he was staring at, or he judged it to be so from its fixtures. One end of it was, he guessed, a kind of beautician's establishment, and his imagination pictured a robot, working with unerring swiftness on the details of a woman's coiffure, and on the externals that made up the picture she presented to the world. Some gadgets and fittings he simply gave up on. There was no way of judging their purpose in the absence of experience. The walls were inlaid with an intricate pattern that all but fooled the eye into believing some natural object was being represented before fading away into an abstraction. The result was soothing and almost hypnotic in the way it monopolized attention. What might have been a shower stall, a large one, was shielded off by nothing that seemed material, but rather by a trick of lighting that set up a wall of flickering opacity. No human was in sight. Bailey's glance fell to the floor. Where did this room end and the other begin? It was easy to tell. There was a line where the quality of the light changed, and that must be it. He stepped towards the line, and after a moment's hesitation, pushed his hand beyond it. He felt nothing, any more than he would have had he shoved his hand into one of Earth's crude tridimensionals. There, at least, he would have seen his own hand still, faintly, perhaps, and overlaid by the image, but he would have seen it. Here, it was lost completely. To his vision, his arm simply ended at the wrist. What if he stepped across the line altogether? Probably his own vision would become inoperative. He would be in a world of complete blackness. The thought of such efficient enclosure was almost pleasant. A voice interrupted him. He looked up and stepped backwards in an almost clumsy haste. Gladia Delmar was speaking. At least Bailey assumed it was she. The upper portion of the flickering light across the shower stall had faded, and a head was clearly visible. It smiled at Bailey. It said, "Hello." "I said hello, and I'm sorry to keep you waiting. I'll be dry soon." Hers was a triangular face, rather broad at the cheekbones, which grew prominent when she smiled, and narrowing with a gentle curve past full lips to a small chin. Her head was not high above the ground. Bailey judged her to be about 5'2" in height. This was not typical. At least, not to Bailey's way of thinking. Spacer women were supposed to be lean toward the tall and stately. Nor was her hair the Spacer bronze. It was a light brown, tinging toward yellow, and worn moderately long. At the moment, it was fluffed out in what Bailey imagined must be a stream of warm air. The whole picture was quite pleasing. Bailey said, in confusion, "If you want us to break contact and wait till you're through—" "Oh, no, I'm almost done. We can still talk meanwhile." "Hannes Gruer told me you would be viewing. You're from Earth, I understand." Her eyes rested full on him, seeming to drink him in. Bailey nodded and sat down. "My companion is from Aurora." She smiled and kept her glance fixed on Bailey as though he remained the curiosity nevertheless, and of course Bailey thought so he was. She lifted her arms above her head, running her fingers through the hair and spreading it out as though to hasten drawing. Her arms were slim and graceful. Very attractive, Bailey thought. Then he thought uneasily, Jessie wouldn't like this. Danielle's voice broke in. Would it be possible, Mrs. 𝗏𝗲𝗓, to have the window we see polarized or draped? My partner is disturbed by the sight of daylight. On Earth, as you may have heard, the young woman, Bailey judged her to be 25, but he had the doleful thought that the apparent ages of spacers could be most deceptive, put her hands to her cheeks and said, Oh my, yes, I know all about that. How ridiculously silly of me. Forgive me, please, but it won't take a minute. I'll have a robot in here. She stepped out of the drawing cabinet, her hand extended toward the contact patch, still talking. I'm always thinking I ought to have more than one contact patch in this room. A house is just no good if it doesn't have a patch within reach, no matter where you stand. Say, not more than 5 feet away. It just... Why, what's the matter? She stared in shock at Bailey, who, having jumped out of his chair and upset it behind him, had reddened to his hairline and hastily turned away. Danielle said calmly, It would be better, Miss 𝗏𝗏𝗓, if, after you had made contact with the robot, you would return to the stall, or, failing that, proceed to put on some articles of clothing. Lydia looked down at her nudity in surprise and said, Well, of course. Chapter the 5th. A crime is discussed. It was only viewing, you see, said Gladia contritely. She was wrapped in something that left her arms and shoulders free. One leg showed to mid-thigh, but Bailey, entirely recovered and feeling an utter fool, ignored it stoically. He said, It was the surprise, Mrs. 𝗏𝗏𝗓. Oh, please, you can call me Gladia, unless that's against your customs. Gladia, then. It's all right. I just want to assure you there was nothing repulsive about it, you understand? Just the surprise. Bad enough for him to have acted the fool, he thought, without having the poor girl think that he found her unpleasant. As a matter of fact, it had been rather... Well, he didn't have the phrase, but he knew quite certainly that there was no way he would ever be able to talk of this to Jessie. I know I've offended you, Gladia said, but I didn't mean to. I just wasn't thinking. Of course, I realize one must be careful about the customs of other planets, but the customs are so queer sometimes. At least, not queer, she hastened to add. I didn't mean queer. I mean strange. You know, and it's so easy to forget, as I forgot about keeping the window darkened. Quite all right, muttered Bailey. She was in another room now, with all the windows draped, and the light had the subtle, different, and more comfortable texture of artificiality. But about the other thing, she went on earnestly, it's just viewing, you see. After all, you didn't mind talking to me when I was in the dryer, and I wasn't wearing anything then, either. Well, said Bailey, wishing she would run down as far as that subject was concerned, hearing you is one thing, and seeing you is another. But that's exactly it. Seeing isn't involved. She reddened a trifle and looked down. I hope you don't think I'd ever do anything like that. I mean, just step out of the dryer if anyone were seeing me. It was just viewing. Same thing, isn't it? Said Bailey. Not at all the same thing. You're viewing me right now. You can't touch me, can you? Or smell me, or anything like that. You could if you were seeing me. Right now I'm 200 miles away from you at least. So how can it be the same thing? Bailey grew interested. But I see you with my eyes. No, you don't see me. You see my image. You're viewing me. And that makes a difference. Oh, the difference there is? I see. In a way, he did. The distinction was not one he could make easily, but it had a kind of logic to it. she said, bending her head a little to one side. "Do you really see?" "Yes." "Does that mean you wouldn't mind if I took off my wrapper?" she said, smiling. He thought, she's teasing and I ought to take her up on it. But aloud he said, "No, it would take my mind off my job. We'll discuss it another time." "Do you mind my being in the wrapper rather than something more formal? Seriously." "I don't mind." "May I call you by your first name, if you have the occasion?" "What is your first name?" "Elijah." "All right." She snugged into a chair that looked hard and almost ceramic in texture, but it slowly gave as she sat until it embraced her gently. Bailey said, "To business now," she said. "To business." Bailey found it all extraordinarily difficult. There was no way even of making a beginning. On Earth, he would ask name, rating, sitting in sector or dwelling, a million different routine questions. He might even know the answers to begin with, yet it would be a device to ease into the serious phase. It would serve to introduce him to the person, make his judgment to the tactics to pursue something other than a mere guess. But here? How could he be certain of anything? The very verb, to see, meant different things to himself and to the woman. How many other words would be different? How often would they be at a cross purpose without his being aware of it? He said, "How long were you married, Gladia?" 10 years, Elijah." "How old are you?" 33. Bailey felt obscurely pleased. She might easily have been 133. He said, "Were you happily married?" Gladia looked uneasy. "How do you mean that?" "Well," for a moment Bailey was at a loss. How do you define a happy marriage? For that matter, what would a Solarian consider a happy marriage? He said, "Well, you saw one another often." "What? I should hope not. We're not animals, you know." Bailey winced. "You did live in the same mansion." I thought, "Of course we did. We're married." But I had my quarters and he had his. He had a very important career, which took much of his time, and I have my work. We viewed each other whenever necessary. He saw you, didn't he? It's not a thing one talks about, but he did see me. Do you have any children? Gladia jumped to her feet in obvious agitation. That's too much! Of all the indecent— Now wait! Bailey brought his fist down on the arm of his chair. Don't be difficult. This is a murder investigation. Do you understand? Murder. And it was your husband who was murdered. Do you want to see the murderer found and punished, or don't you? Then ask about the murder, not about... I have to ask all sorts of things. For one thing, I want to know whether you're sorry your husband is dead. He added with calculated brutality, You don't seem to be. She stared at him haughtily. I'm sorry when anyone dies, especially when he's young and useful. Doesn't the fact that he was your husband make it just a little more than that? He was assigned to me, and, well, we did see each other when scheduled, and she hurried to the next words. And if you must know, we don't have children because none have been assigned to us yet. I don't see what all this has to do with being sorry over someone being dead. Maybe it has nothing to do with it, Bailey thought. It depends on the social facts of life, and with those he was not acquainted. He changed the subject. I'm told you have personal knowledge of the circumstances of his murder. For a moment, she seemed to grow taut. I discovered the body. Is that the way I should say it? Then you didn't witness the actual murder? Oh, no, she said faintly. Well, suppose you tell me what happened. take your time and use your words." He sat back and composed himself to listen. She began. "It was on 3/2 of the 5th. "When was that in standard time?" asked Bailey quickly. "I'm not sure. I really don't know. You can check, I suppose." Her voice seemed shaky, and her eyes had grown large. "They were a little too gray to be called blue," he noted. She said, "He came to my quarters. It was our assigned day for seeing, and I knew he'd come." "He always came on the assigned day?" "Oh, yes. He was a very conscientious man, a good Solarian. He never skipped an assigned day and always came at the same time. Of course, he didn't stay long. We have not been assigned..." She couldn't finish the word, but Bailey nodded. "Anyway," she said, "he always came at the same time, you know, so that everything could be comfortable. We spoke a few minutes. Seeing is an ordeal, but he spoke quite normally to me. It was his way. Then he left to attend to some project he was involved with. I'm not sure what. He had a special laboratory in my quarters to which he could retire on seeing days. He had a much bigger one on his quarters, of course." Bailey wondered what he did in those laboratories. Phytology, perhaps, whatever that was. He said, "Did he seem unnatural in any way? Worried?" No, he was never worried." She came to the edge of a small laugh and buried it at the last moment. "He always had perfect control, like your friend there." For a brief moment her small hand reached out and indicated Neil. He did not stir. "I see. Well, go on." Galeria didn't. Instead she whispered, "Do you mind if I have myself a drink?" "Please do." Gladia's hand slipped along the arm of her chair momentarily. In less than a moment, a robot moved in silently, and a warm drink, Bailey could see the steam, was in her hand. She sipped slowly and set the drink down. She said, "That's better. May I ask a personal question?" Bailey said, "You may always ask." "Well, I've read a lot about Earth. I've always been interested, you know. It's such a queer world." She gasped and added immediately, "I didn't mean that." Bailey frowned a little. "Any world is queer to people who don't live on it." "I mean, it's different, you know. Anyway, I want to ask a rude question. At least, I hope it doesn't seem rude to an Earthman. I wouldn't ask it of a Solarian, of course, not for anything." "Ask what, Gladia?" "About you and your friend. Mr. 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗵𝗲, is it?" "Yes." "You two aren't viewing, are you?" "How do you mean?" "I mean each other. You're seeing, you're there, both of you." Bailey said, "We're physically together, yes." "You could touch him, if you wanted to." "That's right." She looked from one to the other and said, "Oh." It might have meant anything. Disgust, revulsion. Bailey toyed with the idea of standing up, walking to Daniil and placing his hand flat on Daniil's face. It might be interesting to watch her reaction. He said, "You were about to go on with the events of the day when your husband came to see you." He was morally certain that her digression, however interesting it might have been intrinsically to her, was primarily motivated by a desire to avoid just that. She returned to her drink for a moment. Then, "There isn't much to tell. I saw he would be engaged, and I knew he would be anyways, because he was always at some sort of constructive work, so I went back to my own work. Then perhaps 15 minutes later I heard a shout." There was a pause, and Bailey prodded her. "What kind of a shout?" She said, "Rickane's, my husband's. Just a shout, no words, a kind of fright. No, surprise, shock, something like that. I'd never heard him shout before." She lifted her hands to her ears as though to shut out the memory of the sound, and her wrapper slipped slowly down to her waist. She took no notice, and Bailey stared firmly at his notebook. He said, "What did you do?" I ran. I didn't know where he was." "I thought you said he'd gone to the laboratory you maintained in your quarters." "He did, Elijah, but I don't know where that was. Not for sure, anyways. I never went there. It was his. I had a general idea of its direction. I know it was somewhere in the west, but I was so upset I didn't even think to summon any robot. One of them would have guided me easily, but of course none came without being summoned. When I did get there, I found it somehow he was dead." She stopped suddenly, and, to Bailey's acute discomfort, she bent her head and wept. She made no attempt to obscure her face. Her eyes simply closed, and tears slowly trickled down her cheeks. It was quite soundless. Her shoulders barely trembled. Then her eyes opened and looked at him through swimming tears. "I never saw a dead man before. He was all bloody, and his head was just... Oh, I managed to get a robot, and he called others, and I suppose they took care of me and 𝗧𝗵𝗲. I don't remember. I just..." Bailey said, "What do you mean, they took care of 𝗧𝗵𝗲?" "They took him away and cleaned up." There was a small wedge of indignation in her voice, the lady of the house, careful of its condition. "Things were a mess." "And what happened to the body?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Burned, I suppose, like any dead body." "You didn't call the police?" She looked at him blankly, and Bailey thought, "No police?" He said, "You told somebody, I suppose. People found out about the matter." She said, "The robots called the doctor, and I had to call 𝗧𝗵𝗲's place of work. The robots there had to know he wouldn't be back." "The doctor was for you, I suppose." She nodded. For the first time, she seemed to notice her wrapper draped about her hips. She pulled it up into position, murmuring forlornly, I'm sorry." Bailey felt uncomfortable, watching her as she sat there, helpless, shivering, her face contorted with the absolute terror that had come over her with the memory. She had never seen a dead body before. She had never seen blood and a crushed skull. And if the husband-wife relationship on Solaria was something thin and shallow, it was still a dead human being with whom she had been confronted. Bailey scarcely knew what to say or do next. He had the impulse to apologize, and yet, as a policeman, he was doing only his duty. But there were no police on this world. Would she understand that this was his duty? Slowly and gently as he could, he said, "Gladia, did you hear anything at all? Anything besides your husband's shout?" She looked up, her face as pretty as ever, despite its obvious distress, perhaps because of it. She said, "Nothing." No running footsteps, no other voice. She shook her head. "I didn't hear anything." "When you found your husband, he was completely alone. You two were the only ones present." "Yes." "No signs of anyone else having been there?" "None that I could see." "I don't see how anyone could have been there anyway." "Why do you say that?" For a moment she looked shocked. Then she said, dispiritedly, "You're from Earth, I keep forgetting." "Well, it's just that nobody could have been there. My husband never saw anybody except me, not since he was a boy. He certainly wasn't the sort to see anybody, not 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He was very strict, very custom-abiding." "It might not have been his choice. What if someone had just come to see him without an invitation, without your husband knowing anything about it? He couldn't have helped seeing the intruder, regardless of how custom-abiding he was." she said. Maybe, but he would have called robots at once and had the man taken away. He would have. Besides, no one would try to see my husband without being invited. I couldn't conceive of such a thing. Edinburgh Kane certainly would never invite anyone to see him. It's ridiculous to think so, Bailey said softly. Your husband was killed by being struck on the head, wasn't he? You'll admit that. I suppose so. He was... Oh, I'm not asking for the details at the moment. Was there any sign of some mechanical contrivance in the room that would have enabled someone to crush his skull by remote control? Of course not. At least I didn't see any. If anything like that had been there, I imagine you would have seen it. It follows, then, that a hand held something capable of crushing a man's skull, and that hand swung it. Some person had to be within 4 feet of your husband to do that. So someone did see him. No one would, she said earnestly. A Селариan just wouldn't see anyone. A Селариan who would commit murder wouldn't stick at a bit of being seen, would he? To himself, that statement sounded dubious. On Earth, he had known the case of a perfectly conscienceless murderer who had been caught only because he could not bring himself to violate the custom of absolute silence in the community bathroom. Gladia shook her head. You don't understand about seeing. Earthmen just see anyone they want to, all the time, so you don't understand. Curiosity seemed to be struggling within her. Her eyes lightened a bit. Seeing does seem perfectly normal to you, doesn't it? I've always taken it for granted, said Bailey. It doesn't trouble you. Why should it? Well, the films don't say, and I've always wanted to know. Is it all right if I ask a question? Go ahead, said Bailey stolidly. Do you have a wife assigned to you? I'm married. I don't know about the assignment part. And I know you see your wife anytime you want to, and she sees you, and neither of you thinks anything of it. Bailey nodded. Well, when you see her, suppose you just want to... She lifted her hands elbow high, pausing as though searching for the proper phrase. She tried again. Can you just... any time? She let it dangle. Bailey didn't try to help. She said, Well, never mind. I don't know why I should bother you with that sort of thing now anyway. Are you through with me? She looked up as though she might cry again. Bailey said, One more try, Gladia. Forget that no one would see your husband. Suppose someone did. Who might have that been? It's just useless to guess. It couldn't be anyone. It has to be someone. Agent Gruer says there is a reason to suspect some one person. So, you see, there must be someone. A small, joyless smile flickered over the girl's face. I know who you think did it. All right, who? Oh, I'm sorry. A small, joyless smile flickered over the girl's face. I know who he thinks did it. All right, who? She put a small hand on her breast. I. Chapter the 6th. A theory is refuted. I should have said, partner Elijah, said Daniel, speaking suddenly, that is an obvious conclusion. Bailey cast a surprised look at his robot partner. Why obvious? He asked. The lady herself, said Daniel, states that she was the only person who did or would see her husband. The social situation on Solaria is such that even she cannot plausibly present anything else as the truth. Certainly, Agent Gruer would find it reasonable, even obligatory, to believe that a Solarian husband would be seen only by his wife. Since only one person could be in seeing range, only one person could be the murderer, or murderess, rather. Agent Gruer, as you will remember, said that only one person could have done it. Anyone else he considered impossible. Well, he also said Bailey, that one person couldn't have done it either. By which he probably meant that there was no weapon found at the scene of the crime. Presumably, Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲 could explain that anomaly. He gestured with cool, robotic politeness towards where Gladia sat, still in viewing focus, her eyes cast down, her small mouth compressed. Jehoshaphat, thought Bailey. We're forgetting the lady. Perhaps it was his annoyance that had caused him to forget. It was Daniil who annoyed him, he thought, with his unemotional approach to problems. Or perhaps it was myself with his emotional approach. He did not stop to analyze the matter. He said, "That will be all for now, Gladia. However one goes about it, break contact. Goodbye," she said softly. Sometimes one says, "Done viewing," but I like goodbye better. You seem disturbed, Elijah. I'm sorry, because I'm used to having people think I did it, so you don't need to feel disturbed, Daniil said. Did you do it, Gladia? No, she said angrily. Goodbye, then. With the anger not yet washed out of her face, she was gone. For a moment, though, Bailey could still feel the impact of those quite extraordinary gray eyes. She might say she was used to having people think her a murderess, but that was very obviously a lie. Her anger spoke more truly than her words, and Bailey wondered of how many other lies she was capable. And now Bailey found himself alone with Daniil. He said, "All right, Daniil, I'm not altogether a fool." "I have never thought you were, partner Elijah." "Then tell me, what made you say there was no murder weapon found at the site of the crime? There was nothing in the evidence so far, nothing in anything that I've heard that would lead us to that conclusion." "You are correct. I have additional information not yet available to you." "I was sure of that." "What kind?" Agent Gruer said he would send a copy of the report of their own investigation. I have that copy. It arrived this morning. Why haven't you shown it to me? I felt that it would perhaps be more fruitful for you to conduct your investigation, at least in the initial stages, according to your own ideas, without being prejudiced by the conclusion of other people who, self-admittedly, have reached no satisfactory conclusion. It was because I, myself, felt my logical process might be influenced by these conclusions that I contributed nothing to the discussion. Logical processes. Unbidden, there leapt into Bailey's mind the fragment of a conversation that he had once had with a roboticist. A robot, the man had said, is logical, but never reasonable. He said, "You entered the discussion at the end?" "So I did, partner Elijah, but only because at that time I had independent evidence bearing out Agent Gruer's suspicions." "What kind of independent evidence?" "From what could be deduced from Mrs. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's own behavior." "Let's be specific, Daniil." "Consider that if the lady were guilty and were attempting to prove herself innocent, it would be useful to her to have the detective in the case believe her innocent." "Well, if she could warp his judgment by playing upon a weakness of his, she might do so, might she not?" "Strictly hypothetical." "Not at all," was the calm reply. "You will have noticed, I think, that she concentrated her attention entirely on you." "I was doing the talking," said Bailey. "Her attention was on you from the start, even before she could guess that you would have been doing the talking. In fact, one might have thought she would logically have expected that I, as an Auroran, would take the lead in the investigation. Yet she concentrated on you." And what do you deduce from this? That it was upon you, partner Elijah, that she pinned her hopes. You were the Earthmen. What of that? She had studied Earth. She implied that more than once. She knew what I was talking about when I asked her to blank out the outer daylight at the very start of the interview. She did not act surprised or uncomprehending, as she most certainly would have done had she not had actual knowledge of conditions on Earth. Well, since she has studied Earth, it is quite reasonable to suppose that she discovered one weakness Earthmen possess. She must know of the nudity taboo, and of how such a display must impress an Earthman. She explained about viewing. So she did. Yet, did it seem entirely convincing to you? Twice she allowed herself to be seen in what you would consider a state of improper clothing. Your conclusion, said Bailey, is that she was trying to seduce me. Is that it? Seduce you away from your professional impersonality, so it would seem to me. And though I cannot share human reactions to stimuli, I would judge, from what has been imprinted on my instruction circuit, that the lady meets any reasonable standard of physical attractiveness. From your behavior, moreover, it would seem to me that you were aware of that, and that you approved her appearance. I would even judge that Miss Delmar acted rightly in thinking her mode of behavior would predispose you in her favor. Look, said Bailey uncomfortably, regardless of what effect she might have had on me, I am still an officer of the law in full possession of my sense of professional ethics. Get that straight. Now let's see the report. Bailey read through the report in silence. He finished, turned back, and read it through a second time. That brings a new item, he said. The robot. Daniil Oliva nodded. Bailey said thoughtfully, she didn't mention it. Daniil said, you asked the wrong question. You asked if he was alone when she found the body. You asked if anyone else had been present at this death scene. A robot isn't anybody else. Bailey nodded. If he himself were a suspect and were asked who else had been at the scene of a crime, he would scarcely have replied, no one but this table. He said, I suppose I should have asked if any robots were present. Damn it. What questions does one ask anyway in a strange world? He said, how legal is robotic evidence, Daniil? What do you mean? Can a robot bear witness on Solaria? Can it give evidence? Why should you doubt it? A robot isn't human, Daniil. On Earth it cannot be a legal witness. And yet a footprint can, partner Elijah, although that is much less a human than a robot is. The position of your planet in this respect is illogical. On Solaria, robotic evidence, whenever competent, is admissible. Bailey did not argue the point. He rested his chin on his knuckles of one hand and went over the matter of the robot in his mind. In the extremity of terror, Gladia Delmar, standing over her husband's body, had summoned robots. By the time they came, she was unconscious. The robots reported having found her there together with the dead body. Then something else was present as well, a robot. That robot had not been summoned. It was already there. It was not one of the regular staff. No other robot had seen it before or knew its function or assignment. Nor could anything be discovered from the robot in question. It was not in working order when found. Its motions were disorganized, and so, apparently, was the functioning of its positronic brain. It could give none of the proper responses, either verbal or mechanical, and after exhaustive investigation by a robotics expert, it was declared a total loss. Its only activity that had any trace of organization were its constant repetition of, "You're going to kill me. You're going to kill me. You're going to kill me." No weapon that could possibly have been used to crush the dead man's skull was located. Bailey said suddenly, "I'm going to eat, Daniil." And then we see Agent Gruer again. Or view him anyway. Hannes Gruer was still eating when contact was established. He ate slowly, choosing each mouthful carefully from a variety of dishes, peering at each anxiously as though searching for some hidden combination that would find most satisfactory. Bailey thought, he may be a couple of centuries old. Eating may be getting dull for him. Gruer said, "I greet you, gentlemen. You received our report, I believe." His bald head glistened as he leaned across the table to reach a tidbit. "Yes, we have spent an interesting session with Mrs. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 also," said Bailey. Good, said Gruer. "And to what conclusion, if any, did you come?" Bailey said, "That she is innocent, sir." Gruer looked up sharply. "Really?" Bailey nodded. Gruer said, "And yet she is the only one who could see him, the only one who could possibly be within reach," Bailey said. "It's been made clear to me that no matter how firm social customs are on Solaria, the point is not conclusive. May I explain?" Gruer had returned to his dinner. "Of course." "Murder rests on 3 legs," said Bailey, "each equally important. There are motives, means, and opportunity. For a good case against any suspect, each of the 3 must be satisfied. Now I grant you that Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had the opportunity. As for the motive, I've heard of none." Gruer shrugged. "We know of none." For a moment his eyes drifted to the silent Daniil. "All right. The suspect has no known motive, but perhaps she's a pathological killer. We can let the matter slide for a while and continue. She's in his laboratory with him, and there's some reason why she wants to kill him. She waves some club or other heavy object threateningly. It takes him a while to realize that his wife really intends to hurt him. He shouts in dismay, "You're going to kill me." And so she does. He turns to run as the blow descends and it crushes the back of his head. Did a doctor examine the body, by the way? Yes and no. The robots called the doctor to attend Mrs. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and, as a matter of course, he looked at the dead body too. That wasn't mentioned in the report. It was scarcely pertinent. The man was dead. In fact, by the time a doctor could view the body, it had been stripped, washed, and prepared for cremation in the usual manner. "In other words, the robot had destroyed evidence," said Bailey, annoyed. Then, "Did you say he viewed the body? He didn't see it?" "Great space," said Gruer. "What a morbid notion. He viewed it, of course, from all necessary angles, and at close focus, I'm sure. Doctors can't avoid seeing patients under some conditions, but I can't conceive of any reason why one should have to see corpses. Medicine is a dirty job, but even doctors draw the line somewhere." "Well, the point is this. Did the doctor report anything about the nature of the wound that killed Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲? I see what you're driving at. You think that perhaps the wound was too severe to have been caused by a woman. A woman is weaker than a man, sir, and Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is a small woman, but quite athletic plainclothesman. Given a weapon of the proper type, gravity and leverage would do most of the work. Even not allowing for that, a woman in frenzy can do surprising things." Bailey shrugged. "You speak of a weapon. Where is it?" Gruer shifted positions. He held out his hand toward an empty glass, and a robot entered the viewing field and filled it with a colorless fluid that might have been water. Gruer held the glass momentarily, then put it down. As though he had changed his mind about drinking, he said, as is stated in the report, we have not been able to locate it." "I know the report says that. I want to make absolutely certain of a few things. The weapon was searched for thoroughly. By yourself, by robots, but under my own viewing supervision at all times. We could locate nothing that might have been the weapon." That weakens the case against Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲, doesn't it? It does, said 𝗧𝗲 calmly. It is one of several things about the case we don't understand. It is one reason why we have not acted against Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲. It is one reason why I told you that the guilty party could not have committed the crime either. Perhaps I should say that she apparently could not have committed the crime. Apparently? She must have disposed of the weapon some way. So far, we lack the ingenuity to find it. Bailey said dourly, "Have you considered all possibilities?" "I think so." "I wonder, let's see. A weapon has been used to crush a man's skull, and it is not found at the scene of the crime. The only alternative is that it has been carried away. It could not have been carried away by Rakane 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He was dead. Could it have been carried away by Gladiator 𝗧𝗵𝗲? It must have been, said 𝗧𝗲. How? When the robots arrived, she was on the floor, unconscious. Or she may have been feigning unconsciousness, but anyways, she was there. How long a time between the murder and the arrival of the first robot? That depends on the exact time of the murder, which we don't know, said 𝗧𝗲 uneasily. I read the report, sir. One robot reported hearing a disturbance and a cry it identified as Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's. It was apparently the closest to the scene. The summoning signal flashed 5 minutes afterwards. It would take the robot less than a minute to appear on the scene. Bailey remembered his own experience with the rapid-fire appearance of robots when summoned. In 5 minutes, even 10, how far could Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲 have carried a weapon and returned in time to assume unconsciousness? She might have destroyed it in the disposer unit. The disposer unit was investigated, according to the report, and the residual gamma-ray activity was quite low. Nothing sizable had been destroyed in it for 24 hours. I know that, said 𝗧𝗲. I simply present it as an example of what might have been done. True, said Bailey, but there may be a very simple explanation. I suppose the robots belonging to the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 household have been checked and were all accounted for. Oh, yes. And all in reasonable working order. Yes. Could any of those have carried away the weapon, perhaps without being aware of what it was? None of them had removed anything from the scene of the crime, or touched anything, for that matter. That's not so. They certainly removed the body and prepared it for cremation. Well, yes, of course, but that scarcely counts. You would expect them to do that. Jehoshaphat, muttered Bailey. He had to struggle to keep calm. He said, Now, suppose someone else had been on the scene. Impossible, said 𝗧𝗲. How could someone invade Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's personal presence? Suppose, cried Bailey. Now, there was never any thought in the robot's mind that an intruder might have been present. I don't suppose any of them made an immediate search on the grounds about the house. It wasn't mentioned in the report. There was no search till we looked for the weapon, but that was a considerable time afterward. Nor any search for signs of a ground car or an air vehicle on the grounds. No. So if someone had nerved himself to invade Dr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲's personal presence, as you put it, he could have killed him and then walked away leisurely. No one would have stopped him or even seen him. Afterwards, he could rely on everyone being sure no one could have been there. And no one could, said 𝗧𝗲 positively. Bailey said, One more thing, just one more. There was a robot involved. A robot was at the scene. Daniil interposed for the first time. The robot was not at the scene. Had it been there, the crime would not have been committed. Bailey turned his head sharply, and 𝗧𝗲, who lifted his glass a second time as though about to drink, put it down again and stared at Daniil. Is that not so? Asked Daniil. Quite so, said 𝗧𝗲. A robot would have stopped one person from harming another. First law. All right, said Bailey. Granted. but it must have been close. It was on the scene when the other robots arrived. Say, it was in the next room. The murderer was advancing on 𝗏𝗲, and 𝗏𝗲 cries out, "You're going to kill me." The robots of the household did not hear those words. At most, they heard a cry. So, unsummoned, they did not come. But this particular robot heard the words, and first law made it come unsummoned. It was too late. Probably it actually saw the murder committed. It must have seen the last stages of the murder, agreed Gruer. That is what disordered it. Witnessing harm to a human without having prevented it is a violation of the first law, and depending upon circumstances, more or less damage to the positronic brain is induced. In this case, it was a great deal of damage. Gruer stared at his fingertips as he turned the glass of liquid to and fro. To and fro. Bailey said, "Then the robot was a witness. Was it questioned?" "What use? He was disordered. It could only say, 'You're going to kill me.' I agree with your reconstruction that far." They were probably 𝗏𝗲's last words, burned into the robot's consciousness when everything else was destroyed. But I'm told Solaria specializes in robots. Was there no way in which the robot could be repaired? No way in which circuits could be patched? "None," said Gruer sharply. "And there is the robot now." "Scrapped," said Gruer. Bailey raised his eyebrows. "This is a rather peculiar case. No motive, no means, no witnesses, no evidence. Where there was some evidence to begin with, it was destroyed. You have only one suspect, and everyone seems convinced of her guilt. At least everyone is certain no one else can be guilty. That's your opinion, too, obviously. The question then is, why was I sent for?" Gruer frowned. "You seem upset, Mr. Bailey." He turned abruptly to Daniil. "Mr. 𝗏𝗲." "Yes, Agent Gruer." "Won't you please go through the dwelling and make sure all windows are closed and blankets out? Plainclothesman Bailey must be feeling the effect of open space." The statement astonished Bailey. It was his impulse to deny Gruer's assumption and ordered Daniil to keep his place when, on the brink, he caught something of panic in Gruer's voice, something of glittering appeal in his eyes. He sat back and let Daniil leave the room. It was as though a mask had dropped from Gruer's face, leaving it naked and afraid. Gruer said, "That was easier than I had thought. I'd planned so many ways on getting you alone. I never thought the Auroran would leave at a simple request. And yet I could think of nothing else to do." Bailey said, "Well, I'm alone now." Gruer said, "I couldn't speak freely in his presence. He's an Auroran, and he is here because he was forced on us as a price of having you." The Solarian leaned forward. "There's something more to this than murder. I'm not concerned only with the matter of who did it. There are parties on Solaria, secret organizations." Bailey stared. "Surely I can't help you there." "Of course you can. Now, understand this. Dr. 𝗏𝗲 was a traditionalist. He believed in the old ways, the good ways. But there are new forces among us, forces for change, and 𝗏𝗲 has been silenced." "By Mrs. 𝗏𝗲. Hers must have been the hand. That doesn't matter. There isn't an organization behind her, and that is the important matter." "Are you sure?" "Do you have evidence?" "Fag evidence only. I can't help that. Rikain 𝗏𝗲 was on the track of something. He assured me his evidence was good, and I believed him. I knew him well enough to know him for neither fool nor child. Unfortunately, he told me very little. Naturally, he wanted to complete his investigation before laying the matter completely open to the authorities. He must have gotten close to completion, too. Or else they wouldn't have dared the risk of having him openly slaughtered by violence. One thing 𝗏𝗲 told me, though, the whole human race is in danger. Bailey felt shaken. For a moment, it was as though he was listening to 𝗵𝗲 again, but on an even larger scale. Was everyone going to turn to him with cosmic dangers? "Why do you think I can help?" he asked. "Because you're an Earthman," said Gruer. "Do you understand? We on Solaria have no experience with these things. In a way, we don't understand people. There are too few of us here." He looked uneasy. I don't like to say this, Dr. Bailey. My colleagues laugh at me and some grow angry, but it is a definite feeling I have. It seems to me that you Earthmen must understand people far better than we do, just by living among such crowds of them, and a detective more than anyone. Isn't that so?" Bailey had nodded and held his tongue. Gruer said, "In a way, this murder was fortuitous. I have not dared speak to the others about Delmar's investigations, since I wasn't sure who might be involved in the conspiracy, and Delmar himself was not ready to give any details till the investigation was complete. And even if Delmar had completed his work, how would we deal with the matter afterward? How does one deal with hostile human beings? I don't know. From the beginning, I felt we needed an Earthman. When I heard of your work in connection with a murder in Space Town on Earth, I knew we needed you. I got in touch with Aurora, with whose men you have been worked most clearly with, and through them approached the Earth government. Yet my own colleagues could not be persuaded into agreeing to this. Then came the murder, and that was enough of a shock to give me the agreement I needed. At the moment, they would have agreed to anything." Gruer hesitated, then added, "It's not easy to ask an Earthman for help, but I must do so. Remember, whatever it is, the human race is in danger. Earth, too." Earth was doubly in danger, then. There was no mistaking the desperate sincerity in Gruer's voice. But then, if the murder was so fortunate a pretext for allowing Gruer to do what he so desperately wanted to do all the time, was it entirely fortune? It opened new avenues of thought that were not reflected in Bailey's face, eyes, or voice. Bailey said, "I have been sent here, sir, to help. I will do so to the best of my ability." Gruer finally lifted his long-delayed drink and looked over the rim of his glass at Bailey. "Good," he said. "Not a word to the Auroran, please. Whatever this is about, Aurora may be involved. Certainly, they took an unusually intense interest in the case. For instance, they insisted on including Mr. 𝗲𝗲𝗓 as your partner. Aurora is powerful. We had to agree. They say they include Mr. 𝗲𝗲𝗓 only because he worked with you, but it may well be that they wish a reliable man of their own on the case, eh?" He sipped slowly, his eyes on Bailey. Bailey passed the knuckles of one hand against his long cheek, rubbing it thoughtfully. "Now, if that..." He didn't finish, but leapt from his chair and almost hurled himself toward the other before remembering it was only an image he were facing. For Gruer, staring wildly at his drink, clutching his throat, whispering hoarsely, "Burning, burning." The glass fell from his hand, its contents spilling, and Gruer dropped with it, his face distorted with pain. Thus ends Chapter 6. In Chapter 7, entitled Chapter 7, Doctor is Prodded, will continue tomorrow. For now, I'm thinking we make some cookies. So, from the underground. Scout's Honor. Electric Boogaloo. What?